All right, so today we're diving deep right into the book of Isaiah, but specifically we're looking at ancient covenants and divine judgment.
Right.
We've got these excerpts and they're intense, right? Straight from Isaiah.
Yes.
And it kind of makes me wonder, like, how does a book written so long ago
Yeah.
still speak to us, still feel relevant?
It's fascinating, isn't it? Isaiah was writing, at a time of just upheaval, uncertainty, but the way that he uses those ancient covenants as this backdrop to explore this relationship between God and humanity, that's something that speaks to us even now.
Okay, so let's talk about those covenants for a second. It's not like a casual agreement, is it?
Oh, definitely not casual.
This is serious business.
In ancient Near Eastern culture, covenants were like these binding treaties, often between like a powerful king and a vassal nation.
Yeah.
And Isaiah uses this framework to describe the relationship between God, Yahweh, and Israel. He constantly refers to God as father and Israel as his son.
So it's kind of like a parent-child relationship, but with like the added weight of a, legally binding contract.
Exactly. And Isaiah really emphasizes, how God deliberately chose and elevated Israel. He uses specific Hebrew words like rum and gadol instead of the more common terms for like give birth to and raise.
Okay.
It's as if he's saying, you know, God didn't just happen to have Israel. He actively chose to raise them up to a place of importance.
Yeah, so there's like higher expectations, right, because of the special relationship. But then we see Isaiah getting like pretty fired up about social injustice. So
Yes.
what's going on there? What's happening?
This is where it gets really interesting. He's furious that the people are going through the motions of religious rituals, like sacrifices. But they've completely abandoned any sense of social justice.
Yeah.
There's this one line that always just strikes me. It says, "Why to me the multitude of your sacrifices?" It's almost as if God is saying, I don't care about your fancy rituals if your hearts are corrupt and you're neglecting the vulnerable.
So, it's not enough to just go through the motions of faith, right?
Yeah.
You actually have to live it out,
Yes,
especially in how you treat, other people.
especially the vulnerable.
It makes you wonder how much has really changed, doesn't it?
It really does. And to really drive this point home, Isaiah uses these incredibly vivid metaphors that would have resonated with his audience.
Okay, give me an example. What kind of metaphors are we talking about here?
Well, he compares the moral decay in Jerusalem
Hmm.
to silver becoming impure and beer being watered down.
Whoa!
Well, yeah, imagine that.
Yeah.
It's like saying your society has become as worthless as diluted beer.
Wow, I can see how that would have hit home. So he's taking these like everyday images, right? And he's using them to make this much bigger point about their spiritual state. Was that a common tactic for prophets?
It was definitely effective.
Yeah.
Um, by using these familiar images, Isaiah makes his message immediate and impossible to ignore.
Right.
It's not some abstract theological concept. It's something that they could see and taste in their daily lives.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So we've got this broken covenant and we've got a society that's lost its way. But what happens next? I mean, does Isaiah talk about, consequences?
Oh, absolutely. He portrays God as a powerful defender of the oppressed. And there's this chilling line where God says, "I will turn my hand against you."
Mhm.
It's a stark reminder that even God's chosen people
Mm-hmm.
aren't exempt from judgment when they stray from his path.
It's not just like a passive judgment either, right? It
Yeah.
sounds like God is actively like intervening. What does that look like in Isaiah's prophecy?
Well, one striking image is
Yeah.
that of, worthless idols fleeing into caves and holes to escape God's judgment. Now, there's some debate among scholars about whether, it's the idols themselves that are fleeing or the people who worship them.
So even the text itself, right, has this kind of ambiguity that makes you think more deeply about it. I like that. It's not all spelled out for you.
Exactly. And that's what makes studying ancient texts so rewarding. There are always new layers to uncover, new interpretations to consider.
Yeah.
But regardless of who's fleeing,
Yeah.
the imagery is clear. Those who cling to false gods and ignore justice will face the consequences.
So we've talked about how Isaiah uses powerful imagery, right, to condemn this corrupt society around him. But
Right.
does he call out any specific groups or individuals
Yeah.
who are facing judgment?
He definitely targets the arrogant leaders of Judah.
Yeah.
And guess what? He uses another metaphor. But this time it's a vineyard that's producing rotten fruit.
Okay, so not the watered down beer this time, but I get the point. Something that should be good is actually rotten to the core. Is there a connection to any other part of Isaiah?
Absolutely. It links back to the parable of the vineyard in Isaiah 5.1 to the 7. God had put so much care and effort into cultivating this vineyard, representing his chosen people. But instead of producing good fruit, they yielded rebellion and injustice.
Yeah.
So this metaphor really underscores the depth of their betrayal and the inevitability of judgment.
It almost makes you feel bad for God, right? Like he's heartbroken over their choices.
That sense of disappointment and betrayal is definitely present in Isaiah's writing.
Okay, we've covered corrupt silver, watered down beer, and rotten grapes.
Yeah.
I'm sensing a theme here. Are there any other powerful metaphors that Isaiah uses to describe judgment?
He uses this fascinating contrast between two sources of water. The gently flowing waters of Shiloah, which the people reject, and the turbulent waters of the Euphrates, which are brought against him as judgment.
Wait, so water can be both a symbol of blessing and judgment?
Yes.
I would have thought it would have only been one or the other.
That's the brilliance of Isaiah's imagery.
Yeah.
He takes something as basic as water and he infuses it with multiple layers of meaning.
Okay.
And remember, these weren't just random rivers. They held, deep cultural and historical significance for the people. Shiloah was a local spring associated with life and sustenance, while the Euphrates was this mighty river, often symbolizing foreign powers and the threat of invasion.
So by rejecting Shiloah, they're essentially rejecting like God's gentle provision, and they're bringing upon themselves this destructive force of the Euphrates. It's a powerful way to show how their choices have consequences.
Right.
So what happens next?
This is where Isaiah gets really bold. He issues this mocking challenge to the surrounding nations, almost like he's trash talking on behalf of God.
Wait, trash talking prophets. This I've got to hear.
It's in Isaiah 8.9-10. He basically tells these nations to get ready for battle, while warning them that they're doomed to fail. It's like he's saying, bring it on, but you're gonna regret it.
So there's this incredible confidence, the certainty that God will ultimately triumph, right? That must have been reassuring for those who were, faithful to God, even when things looked bleak. But all this talk about, impending doom, it makes you wonder if anyone was actually listening to Isaiah's warnings.
That's a question for the ages, isn't it? We'll never know for sure how many hearts were truly changed by Isaiah's message. But there's this one intriguing detail in Isaiah 8.1 that really makes you wonder.
Okay, I'm hooked. What is it? What's the detail?
Isaiah is told to write a message, but not just any message. He has to write it with the stylus of a man.
Wait, what's so strange about that? He was a man, wasn't he?
That's the thing. It seems so simple, yet scholars are still, debating its significance. It's like a little puzzle, tucked into the text. Why specify the stylus of a man? What does that tell us about the nature of the message, the intended audience, or even Isaiah's own role as a prophet?
I think that's one of the things that makes, studying ancient texts so fascinating. It's not always about finding like definitive answers, but about grappling with the questions, exploring the nuances, and discovering, new layers of meaning.
Absolutely. But getting back to this idea of judgment, Isaiah uses another image that really stands out. It's this idea that the light of Israel, which is typically associated with hope and guidance, can actually become a consuming fire, destroying God's enemies.
Oh, wow. That's intense. So it's like the very source of life and goodness becomes an instrument of judgment.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that God's justice is not always gentle. It can be fierce and even destructive when faced with unrepentant sin.
It seems like we've already covered so much ground. Broken covenants, vivid metaphors, trash-talking prophets, and even some cryptic details that still puzzle scholars today. But there's still more to uncover, right?
There is.
I can't wait to hear what other powerful imagery Isaiah uses to convey this message of divine judgment.
You're right. We've only just scratched the surface. Isaiah's prophecies are full of surprises. And in the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore some of the other striking images he uses, including a transformed animal kingdom and a devastating prophecy against the mighty Babylonian Empire. Stay tuned.
So we left off talking about how even the light of Israel, usually a symbol of hope, can become a force of judgment in Isaiah.
Right.
It makes you wonder, like, what other powerful, maybe even unexpected images he uses.
Well, there's one that seems to almost contradict this idea of fiery judgment. It's this idyllic vision of a transformed animal kingdom where predator and prey actually live together in harmony.
Hold on, from fire and fury to animal buddies, that's quite a shift. What's going on there?
It's a surprising image. But think about it, this way. It's not just some random collection of animals chilling out. Isaiah very specifically describes wolves and lambs, leopards and goats, all coexisting peacefully. It's it's this beautiful picture of the peace and justice. They're supposed to come with the ideal king, the Messiah.
So it's less about like a literal zoo and more about what that harmony represents, like a world where God's will is done.
Exactly. It's a glimpse of that ultimate restoration. But Isaiah doesn't shy away from the fact that we're not there yet. And a big part of that is dealing with injustice. And a big symbol of that injustice at the time was Babylon.
Right, Babylon was this massive empire back then. I'm guessing Isaiah doesn't go easy on them.
Not at all. He talks about, destruction from the sovereign judge. And here's the thing. He uses the name Shaddai for God. That's usually a name connected to blessings, to abundance. So when it's used in the context of judgment, it really drives home the point that even God's good gifts can be removed when there's, a deliberate turning away from what's right.
It adds a layer of complexity to the idea of judgment, right? It's not just about punishment, but about the consequences of choosing to live apart from God's will. Does he mention any specific people in Babylon who are going to face this judgment?
There's this intriguing line about Hela, son of Shachar, in Isaiah 14:12. Most scholars think this is a jab at the king of Babylon, using a myth about a figure who tried to take over heaven and failed.
So it's like Isaiah saying, hey, Mr. Big Shot King, thinking you're all powerful, even the gods can fall.
That's a great way to put it. It's a reminder that even earthly rulers are ultimately accountable to a higher power.
We've covered a lot of heavy stuff: judgment, betrayal, consequences. Does Isaiah offer any hope in all of this? I mean, it can't be all doom and gloom, right?
You're absolutely right. In the midst of these warnings, there are these beautiful passages where God speaks directly to Zion. That's another name for Jerusalem. It represents God's people, offering comfort and assurance.
Okay, what does that sound like?
He describes himself as Zion's husband and protector, promising to restore his people and never abandon them. It's incredibly powerful, especially for those who are, facing exile and hardship. Imagine being far from your home, feeling lost and alone, and then hearing those words.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, God's love and faithfulness remain constant.
Exactly. And those words still resonate with people today who are, going through tough times. But there's one more element of Isaiah's prophecy that I think you'll find particularly intriguing. Have you ever heard of the servant songs?
Oh yeah. I've heard those are pretty important, especially for Christians. What's the connection to Isaiah?
He's the one who first introduces this idea of a suffering servant who takes on the sins of humanity. It's a concept that's echoed throughout the Bible, and it points toward the ultimate sacrifice of Jesus.
So even in a book that talks a lot about judgment and consequences, there's this thread of hope, of redemption woven throughout.
That's the beauty of Isaiah. He doesn't sugarcoat the reality of sin and its consequences, but he also points toward a future where God's love and justice ultimately triumph. And this hope culminates in his vision of a new heavens and a new earth.
Oh yeah. That's a common theme in the Bible. What's Isaiah's take on it?
He describes it as a complete restoration, where God's presence is fully realized and everything is made new. It's this ultimate victory over sin and death.
So it's like all the judgment and hardship is ultimately leading to something better, a world where everything is made right.
Precisely. But it's not just about passively waiting for that future. Remember what we talked about earlier, how Isaiah emphasizes social justice.
Right, how it's not enough to just go through the motions of religious rituals. You have to actively live out your faith in how you treat others, especially the vulnerable.
Exactly. And that's where Isaiah's message becomes so relevant for us today. We live in a world that's still grappling with issues of injustice, oppression, and violence. And Isaiah's words challenge us to not just sit back and wait for God to fix everything, but to be active participants in bringing about that transformation.
So it's not just about like personal piety. It's about working for justice and righteousness in the world around us.
Exactly. And that brings us back to one of the core themes of Isaiah's prophecy, that these ancient words aren't just, dusty relics of the past. They have the power to speak directly to our lives, challenge our assumptions, and inspire us to action.
And that's what I love about exploring these ancient texts. It's like having a conversation across time and space with people who wrestled with the same big questions we still face today. But enough for me for now. What else does Isaiah have in store for us?
I'm glad you asked.
Yeah.
There's still so much to uncover. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore the literal and symbolic dimensions of Isaiah's prophecies. We'll talk about how to apply these ancient words to our own lives and wrestle with those big questions about judgment, hope, and our role in creating a more just and compassionate world.
So we've journeyed through, some pretty intense imagery and metaphors from Isaiah.
We have.
It's amazing how he can talk about these huge concepts, right? Like
Yeah.
judgment and restoration. And it still feels relevant to our lives today.
It's remarkable, isn't it? Isaiah was writing to, a specific community facing particular challenges. But the way he explores the human condition, our tendency to stray from what's right, and the consequences of that. It's a story that keeps repeating itself throughout history.
Yeah, and he doesn't just say, hey, you messed up, too bad, so sad. He weaves in this message of hope, of a future where things are made right. It makes you think about the different ways people throughout time, right, have found meaning in Isaiah's words.
Absolutely. For some, it's a literal roadmap of future events. For others, it's more about the symbolic truths, woven throughout the text.
Yeah.
But regardless of how you interpret it, there's this powerful reminder that God is working through history, even when things seem chaotic or hopeless.
And it's not just about waiting around for God to fix everything, right? I keep thinking about how Isaiah calls out, those who are neglecting social justice, those who, turn a blind eye to suffering. It feels like a call to action, even thousands of years later.
I think you're spot on. Isaiah isn't just, concerned with individual salvation. He's passionate about creating a society where everyone flourishes, a world where justice and righteousness prevail. It challenges us to ask, what are we doing to contribute to that kind of world?
Yeah, it's easy to, to get caught up in our own lives, our own struggles, and forget about, the bigger picture. But Isaiah seems to be saying, hey, pay attention. Look around. There's work to be done.
And that work doesn't necessarily require, grand gestures or sweeping pronouncements. It can start with the everyday choices we make, how we treat those around us, how we use our resources, how we speak up against injustice.
It's that whole idea of, think globally, act locally, right? Even small acts of kindness and compassion can contribute to that larger vision of a restored world.
Exactly. It's about aligning ourselves with God's heart for justice and mercy, and then, letting that shape our actions in the world.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive into Isaiah, from broken covenants to vivid metaphors, trash-talking prophets to glimpses of a hopeful future. It's been quite a journey.
It really has, and I think it's important to remember that Isaiah's prophecies have both literal and symbolic dimensions. They speak to specific historical events, but they also offer timeless truth about God's character and His relationship with humanity. It's a book that deserves to be read and reread, contemplated and discussed.
I totally agree. And as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. We've talked a lot about divine judgment, but what about that vision of restoration, that hope for a new heavens and new earth? What does that say about our responsibility here and now to build a more just and compassionate world?
That's a great question to ponder. And I think the answer lies not just in grand gestures, but in those everyday acts of kindness, those choices we make to reflect God's love and justice in the world. It's about participating in that restoration, brick by brick, act by act.
Beautifully said. Thanks for guiding us through this deep dive into Isaiah.
It's been my pleasure.
And to all our listeners, we encourage you to keep exploring these ancient texts and discover their power for yourselves. Until next time, keep diving.